The fallout continues after President Trump ordered a drone strike, that killed Iranian terrorist and military leader Qasem Soleimani. What does this mean for the future of the Middle East? What does it also mean for the future of Israel? And did Trump make the right call? Well, on this important topic, I am speaking with right now David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's also author of the new book, Trump and the Jews. And he's also the founder and president of Shiloh Israel Children's Fund. We're going to talk about all of those different things later on in the show. But Mr. Rubin, thank you for coming on the Florida Roundtable today.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
And so let's just get started. I just mentioned President Trump's drone strike in Iraq that killed Qasem Soleimani. The fallout continues. Some people think it will make the United States and the world safer. Other people think it makes us less safe because they're afraid of escalation. What do you think?
Well, there is no question at all that the Middle East is a very volatile place. It's a rough neighborhood, as we say. And any lack of response to the attack on the American embassy would have been perceived as weakness. You have to understand that. True, it wasn't a Benghazi. You didn't have staff inside the embassy, several people killed, as happened in Benghazi. But if you look inside and you look at the damage, terrible damage to the embassy, and damage to the security system, a fire set inside the embassy. The embassy was in shambles. Now, you have to understand that is humiliating to the United States. It hurts the deterrence of the United States. And in the Middle East, and as you know, I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem. I know the Middle East. I've been living here for 28 years already. There is no question that if you do not respond and respond strongly to an attack of that kind, then it'll be perceived as weakness. President Trump understood that, and he responded accordingly.
And why was it important to take out this specific guy, this specific Iranian military leader?
Well, we're talking about someone who literally has blood on his hands. Hundreds of Americans have been killed, and countless other people have been killed. Countless Iranians have been killed and imprisoned by him in their protests. You have to understand that we are talking about the Adolf Eichmann to Adolf Hitler. This is the right-hand man to the Ayatollah Khomeini. And if he wasn't stopped, then it would just get worse and worse. The spread, the tentacles of the Iranian regime throughout the Middle East is enormous. They are supporting the Hezbollah terrorist organization. They're supporting the Hamas terrorist organization. They're supporting countless terrorist organizations in Africa. They are spreading their wings throughout the world, and their evil influence in Central America and South America, in encouraging illegal immigration to the United States. That's the Iranian government. That's the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, of which Soleimani was the head. So this is something that couldn't go on. It couldn't be allowed to continue because it is truly creating havoc, not just throughout the Middle East, but throughout the world.
And this is something you know a lot about because, well, you live in the Middle East. You're speaking from Jerusalem, but you're also the mayor of Shiloh. And do you think that most people in Israel agree with you that this was the right move?
Yes, no doubt about it. Not even a question. Look, Israelis aren't looking to to heat things up necessarily. Nobody wants to have missiles flying at our cities. But when there is evil, you have to respond to it, and you can't allow it to create havoc that you did not request. So here's a situation where they had to be responded to. All Israelis understand that. Look, I'm speaking to you as one who was wounded in a terrorist attack. My 3-year-old son was shot in the head. We're not speaking, as people who are trying to just stir things up. We've already experienced the trouble. We've already experienced the violence, but we also understand the realities in the Middle East are that you must respond, and it's not the fear of what Iran is going to do now. That shouldn't be the real question being asked here. The question should be asked is, was it a justified attack on Iran, and will it deter them? Will it cause them to think twice before committing similar attacks as they did on the embassy? And I believe the answer is yes.
You just mentioned there that you were attacked by Muslim terrorists and your son was shot in the head. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell that story. What happened?
Well, I'll give you the abbreviated version. We were driving back from Jerusalem. My 3-year-old son was sitting in the baby seat, and suddenly the car was ambushed with a hail of bullets. The terrorists were on the side of the road shooting with AK-47 assault rifles, so-called Palestinian terrorists. And as I said, I was wounded in the leg. My son was shot in the head. The bullet that went into his head and missed his brainstem. It missed his brainstem by 1 millimeter. But there was damage, and there were operations, and there was post-trauma therapy that he had to go through, and that damage isn't completely finished, and we're a lot of years later. So, this is something that we experienced. 49 bullet holes in the car. We know what terrorism is, and there is the silver lining, of course, in this, because there is silver lining in everything that happens. And as a result of that terrorist attack, I started the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund to heal the trauma of the terror victim children in the heartland of Israel. So we have a campus now. Okay, we're about 15 years later. We have a campus with over 2,000 children. We combine therapy with education, and we are truly restoring the lost innocence of childhood to those children. We use music therapy, art therapy, therapeutic horseback riding, animal-assisted therapy, and various other forms of therapy. But that's how we're healing the trauma. That's our response to the terrorists. And yes, we are not a government. We're the Shiloh Israel Children's Fund. We're an organization, nonprofit organization, and governments respond in their way, armies respond in their way. We're responding in our way as civilians. But I want to encourage anyone who wants to find out more by going to Shiloh, that's spelled SHILOH, ShilohIsraelChildren.org, ShilohIsraelChildren.org.
I'm speaking with David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, Middle East expert. And back to the fact that this strike killed that Iranian general that we've been talking about, there have been threats from the Ayatollah. Is that something America or even Israel should be really worried about?
Well, again, I'm not doubting that they're going to try to launch a response, and there may be a response in time. But wild threats are to be expected. This is the Middle East. There are macho ego games going on here in the in the Muslim world certainly. But that being said, decisive action is what determines the reality. And the president was very decisive in showing that Iranian aggression will not be tolerated. You know, he's been, actually, it must be said, that since President Trump came to office, he has been resolute and he's been consistent in opposing the Iranian aggression throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. And he got the United States out of the Iran deal, which would have given them nuclear power and billions of weapons and billions of dollars to spend in supporting terrorism, and you know that he put to an end. You know, and we have to remember, during the Obama administration, they were sending billions of dollars in cash to the Ayatollah and his regime. This needed to be stopped, and President Trump has been consistent. So, you know, that is the crux of it. I laid out all the details of it very clearly in my book, Trump and the Jews, and I want to encourage people to get a copy because then they will really understand what's going on in the Middle East and what's going on in the conflict with Iran.
And if people want to find that book, is it available at the usual bookstores and Amazon.com?
Oh, absolutely. Or they can also go to my other website, which is davidrubinisrael.com. davidrubinisrael.com, which gives them information about Trump and the Jews and all my other books. And as you said, they can also go to Amazon.com and just type in the words Trump and the Jews.
And I'm speaking with David Rubin. He is the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. And as you just heard from him, he's also author of the book Trump and the Jews. Gave his take on some of that. Later on, I'm going to ask him specifically more details in that book and other things that the Trump administration has done for Israel. But with the ongoing situation between the United States and Iran, and of course what's going on in Iraq, there's much more details that we can discuss, and we will do that in just a moment. I've been having an interesting conversation with David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, also the author of the book Trump and the Jews. He's also authored many other books as well. He's definitely an expert on terrorism and the Middle East. He's also founded Shiloh Israel Children's Fund, which helps victims of terrorist attacks. And we'll talk more about that later on in the show. But Mr. Rubin, I wanted to ask you, there are some out there who say the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad that happened not too long ago was just a spontaneous eruption of outrage by Iraqi civilians. Do you buy that argument?
Well, all you have to do is look back into history a little bit, not so distant history either. Look at what happened in 1979 in Iran when 52 American hostages were taken captive and held for 444 days by Iranian savages. Now remember, if you if you think back and try to remember, if you're old enough, remember what the media was saying at that time. They were referring to those hostage takers as Iranian students. It was portrayed as a spontaneous rebellion against the Americans. Well, we soon found out that it was anything but that. It was organized and incited by the Iranian regime, by the previous Ayatollah. And it also happened because Jimmy Carter was a very weak president. And his weakness was clear to the Iranians, and they went ahead and did what they felt they could get away with. And they got away with it for 444 days until President Reagan was elected, and they quickly released the hostages, no doubt understanding that when you have a strong president who acts resolutely and is prepared to act resolutely, then you can't do things like that.
So you believe that now the Iranians are basically taking notice because President Trump has struck against that leader, and they might be afraid to take similar action like attacking an embassy.
That's true. And again, I'm not saying that they're not going to try, but they will hesitate, they will think twice, and it might not happen so quickly. You have to also take note that President Trump made a very clear and very public statement after his attack that the American military and intelligence has pointed out 52 potential targets in Iran that could be hit if there is an Iranian response. And it's very notable that he pointed out 52 targets, which symbolizes those 52 American hostages. He's well aware of the history. His advisors are well aware of the history, and they're well aware of the symbolism of that number 52, and that the Iranians will understand that symbolism very well.
You know, one thing that a lot of people probably don't understand if they're not just totally up on Middle Eastern foreign policy is why is Iran in Iraq in the first place? What is their goal in that region? They have a presence in Iraq, in Syria, and Lebanon, and in Yemen. What exactly is their goal?
Their goal is world domination. It starts with countries nearby. It starts with dominating the Persian Gulf, dominating countries like Iraq that have a large Shiite Muslim population, which, of course, Iran is a Shiite Muslim country. So that's where it starts. It's not where it ends. It starts there. It continues on to Israel. It continues on to Europe. It continues on to the United States. And it's not David Rubin from Jerusalem making this up. All right, I may be speaking to you from Jerusalem. I may live in Israel, and I may be the former mayor of Shiloh and a terror victim, and all of those things that you've already mentioned. But it's not me talking. It's the Ayatollahs talking. The Ayatollah Khomeini, the previous Ayatollah, made it very clear that his goal is to export the Islamic Revolution. Emphasis on the word export. The Ayatollah Khomeini, his successor, has made that very clear, that he supports that central goal of the Islamic Revolution, to export the Islamic Revolution around the world. So they're not just talking about Israel, they're not just talking about the Persian Gulf, they're not just talking about Europe even, they're talking about the United States and the rest of the free world.
I'm speaking with David Rubin. He's the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, also a Middle Eastern expert. You talked before in the last segment that the Obama administration, you believe, made the wrong moves when it comes to Iran. I'm guessing you're talking about the GPCOA, the nuclear deal. Why were you against that?
Well, it's not just the people on the right, you have to understand. In Israel, wall to wall, everyone was against that Iran deal. Why? Why do you think that is? Well, the answer is very clear. The Iran deal gives them, or gave them, a direct path to a nuclear bomb. They would have had a nuclear bomb already if that deal would have remained in full force. Now they're continuing on their path, but they were continuing on their path before, and now they're not continuing unhindered. Now they have a big problem with with opposition within their country. There are massive protests all the time, which they are brutally suppressing. But there are protests against their regime. They are very weakened financially, economically, because they're not getting the massive financial support that they were getting during the Obama administration. And even the Europeans, who certainly have been no help on this particular issue, even the Europeans are having doubts about that deal and what it actually provides or doesn't provide to them. Europe has to remember they are one of the main targets of the Iranian regime. The Iranian regime wanted to have them on their knees, literally sucking up to the Iranian regime. Well, the Trump administration put an end to that, and the Europeans should be thanking President Trump for putting an end to that servitude.
What would you tell those in America, and I know a lot of them, who believe that we should just pull out of the Middle East completely, just completely remove our military from everywhere in the Middle East because it's just not in our interest anymore to be in places like Afghanistan and Iraq? What would you say to someone who believes that?
Well, some of that I would agree to. Some of that I would agree with, certainly. Look, you have to remember that stationary troops are always at a disadvantage. And the United States, yes, the United States has very clear interests, defeating Iran, stopping Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, weakening the Iranian regime that is creating havoc throughout the world. That is a very clear American interest. But having stationary American troops that are in danger, I don't see that's something that the United States has to be doing. But the United States should never abandon the freedom to act and to act strongly in defense of American interests when it's needed. And sometimes in order to do that, there have to be American ships at sea. There has to be an active American Air Force in different parts of the world. Yes, that needs to be done. And sometimes there is a need to have some American advisors on site and on the ground.
I've been speaking with David Rubin. He's former mayor of Shiloh, Israel, also author of the book Trump and the Jews. He's speaking to us from Israel, so he obviously knows a lot about the Middle East, an expert on affairs in the Middle East. We've been talking about the whole situation between Trump, the United States, and Iran and Iraq. It's been a very interesting conversation so far. The Trump administration, some believe, has been the friendliest administration to the nation of Israel. I'm talking with one person who believes that, David Rubin, former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's speaking with me right now from Jerusalem. He has a book out called Trump and the Jews. So we're going to talk about that, the Trump administration's relationship with Israel and what he thinks about it. So, Mr. Rubin, why did you decide to write the book Trump and the Jews?
After President Trump was elected, I saw the opposition, and we're not just talking about opposition. We're talking about violent name-calling, violence committed in the march through the streets of Washington, D.C. immediately after he was elected and at his inauguration. We're talking about an opposition that defies all norms of democracy. And what I saw also was that some of that strongest opposition was coming from the Jewish community in America, was coming from American Jews, from the more knee-jerk liberal part of the American Jewish population, but from the far left, from people like Bernie Sanders and his followers. And I found it very disturbing, because what I could already see in the early stages of the Trump administration was that this is a president that understands the importance of Israel, that has great respect for the Jewish community from his years as a successful businessman in New York City and contacts that he made with Jewish people in New York. And I just found it very disturbing, and I said, I really need to examine this. I really need to research this issue of Trump and the Jews. What is it about the Jewish community that makes them among his strongest opponents, but also makes American Jews, some American Jews, very, very passionate supporters? So you have the strong opponents of in a majority of the American Jewish population, and you have a very passionate minority that thinks President Trump is doing a great job. And over here in Israel, the overwhelming majority of Israelis think that President Trump is doing a great job. So what is it? What's it all about? So I researched it, and I found some very interesting things. Number one, that President Trump has a connection with the Jewish community, a very positive connection with the Jewish community that goes all the way back to his childhood, growing up in New York, growing up in the outer borough of Queens, and learning the values of hard work from his father, which is a value that American Jewish immigrants always held by. If I look back to most of the American Jewish immigrants that came in the early part of the 20th century, they came and they worked hard, and that was the most important thing to them, to work hard, to give their children an education in order to get ahead. And the American Jews became the most successful, at least financially and professionally, the most successful community in America, the most successful religious group in America. And it was all through hard work and education. The flip side of it, of course, was that the bulk of the American Jewish community abandoned its Jewish heritage, abandoned its amazing history as a people, and as a result of that, something always comes in to fill a vacuum. When you have a vacuum, what filled the vacuum for the American Jewish community is liberalism, and it's rapidly been transforming into socialism, and that's something that is not a good thing for Israel. It's not a good thing for the American Jewish community, and frankly, it's not a good thing for America. When you have all of this name calling, all of this knee-jerk liberalism that says that nothing that President Trump can do is right, and that's what's led to this impeachment craziness, and that's what has led to the shall I say, the paralysis of the United States Congress, where nothing is getting done, at least in the House of Representatives, and all that they've been focused on is investigations of President Trump. So, furthermore, in the book Trump and the Jews, I explored what's happening in Israel, what's happening in the Middle East, what the truth is about what's happening in Israel and what's happening in the Middle East. And I explored President Trump's relationship to all of that. So that's what Trump and the Jews is all about. There you have it in a nutshell, Michael.
All right. And what specifically, just name a couple of things that Trump has done that you believe is really helping Israel right now.
Sure. Well, in the book I covered some of those things, such as the opposition to the Iran deal, the opposition to Iran's nefarious actions in the Middle East, the moving of the American embassy to Jerusalem, every American Jew, virtually every American Jew, and Jews around the world go to a Passover Seder. And when they go to that Passover Seder, at the end, if they get to the end of the Seder, they sing a song about Jerusalem, and the words are, next year in Jerusalem, next year in the rebuilt Jerusalem. So that's something that American Jews, all American Jews, should have supported when President Trump had the courage to move the embassy to Jerusalem, the American embassy, and to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital. On top of that, the strategic Golan Heights in the north of Israel that overlooks the entire Galilee, President Trump recognized that the Golan Heights is part of sovereign Israel. In addition to that, he stopped the payments that were going to the Palestinian terrorists. Those three terrorists that wounded my son and me, those terrorists are in jail. But their families have been getting payments from the Palestinian Authority. Every single month they get a payment, a substantial salary from the Palestinian Authority. President Trump said, no, we're going to stop that. That we're going to stop payments to the Palestinian Authority until they stop paying terrorists. These are all great things that President Trump has done. In addition, he recognized that the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria, the so-called West Bank, are not illegal.
Right. And I know that these are things that you all cover in your book, Trump and the Jews, which you can find at all the bookstores and Amazon.com. And if you want to find out more on David Rubin himself, you can go to his website, davidrubin.com. Mr. Rubin
DavidRubinIsrael.com.
Oh, DavidRubinIsrael.com, excuse me. And Mr. Rubin, thank you so much for coming on the Florida Roundtable today. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. It was good to be with you, Michael.